I want to hear all about this the Friday event. Sorry I missed it.
Yeah, and it'll be useful to go through the recording. There was work by Fabienne and Andrea that was absolutely worth watching, but it's worth watching in context. But one of the things we struggled with at the end was, I have a problem with us producing so much stuff without making it relevant and accessible and readable and useful. I also have a problem with the lack of writing in the community. And yes, of course, I'm looking at you, Alan. These are real concerns because so much of what you talk about the death of social media, in a sense, is a waste in the sense that, in a year or two, you're not going to be able to find out what you wrote on whatever social media platform. They don't want you to have useful access to your archive. Mastodon and things are a little better, but first of all, the name is ridiculously stupid. To call it something federated, fine. But anyway, so I've been experimenting with things like the rolling journal. You've both seen that, right? That's the one where I summarize. Okay, I'll show you real quick.
Yeah. I was just on it the other day.
Okay, cool. So, and that's just one example. And then, what's the point of this stuff has to be discussed, and in the sense that what are we trying to augment? If it's lots of discussions, that's fine, but then we're trying to augment our own record. If our own record is primarily transcripts, that's kind of problematic too, but Andrea had some good ideas. One of them is at the end of every session, we'll spend 10 minutes where everybody summarizes the day, so that will be good for high quality speech to text, which I'll then put at the beginning of the transcript. So at least that will be readable. We're trying to find social ways to make it more, readable.
I think that's really important. Yeah, layers of summary and compression are so critical. And I agree. It's one thing to have a open source, raw transcript of all the notes and events, and that's good. But if it's the kind of thing that you want people to interact with, then progressive summarization is definitely the way to go.
Yeah, I'm just looking up to see our videos creeping up. Yeah, the summarizations are
This
important.
meeting is being recorded.
Hi, Fabian.
Hello, hello.
Hello, I'm just dragging up video number 3 now of our record. Because it was just so massive. Hang on. This time at least I made them HD, not 4K. Because of course we don't really need 4K. But I think there's 4 or 5 1-hour segments coming up.
In fact, I was thinking after, like 99% of the time, we don't really care about our faces. It's mostly the audio that we care about. And I think having a high resolution audio and low resolution video, in most cases, would probably be fine.
Yeah,
especially when you do demo, for example, arguably that's as important as the faces and the emotions, but usually it doesn't move too much, and then we don't need super high res.
Except when you're actually looking at the demo, then I'd want super high res of the demo being displayed so I can actually read the source code if there's something visible in the background.
Sorry, I don't know who this is. I have to.
And for the demo part, what's interesting also is the demonstration that a guest did like 6 months ago, where he was recording his own screen and then doing a OCR and making his own screen interactive. That's the kind of demo we need in high resolution. But yeah, that's not too frequent.
Okay. I hear the session on Friday was a great success.
I think so.
It sounded amazing. I'm sorry I missed it.
To be honest, it was also a mess. I think it was a success, but also a mess in all different kind of ways.
Okay.
It was confusing and lost, but I still think productive.
So here's the thing. Alan just asked if I could cut the little personal bit we had at the front. I can. The issue is that when I edit in Final Cut, the file size absolutely balloons. But now that we've agreed that I should do HD, it goes back down again. So that's why before I haven't often edited those calls, even if it's just me being stupid for a few minutes drinking my coffee. But yeah, I can absolutely do that.
Okay. Great.
I have to show you guys one thing because, I have to. You can see the screen fine, right? Okay, you ready to see what's new? Select text R, do Command F. Wow. Okay, let me do that again. Adobe, Command F. So what I've done, this is just Reader, it's just the find results. First of all, the headings are no longer displayed as normal headings. They're made the same font and gray. Because this is so bizarre. We go into lots of far-reaching wild things, as I absolutely think we should. But then sometimes it's easy to forget our basic bread and butter interactions. So it was only last week where I really looked through this again and decided, if you're going through a search dialogue, before we had 2 gray lines above and below. Do you need that much context? No, you don't. Do you really care where it is? No, you don't. You care about the sentence, and if the sentence looks interesting, then you want to check in what section it is, right?
Yep.
So yep. It was actually, yeah, so X and P. Boom, right? Isn't that just more readable now?
That's great.
Yep.
It's just easy to forget a lot of these. What happened? Yeah, right. So here, as you know, on top, we've also filtered it. So if you search for AR, it will not give you ARE, which was an absolute pain.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Right, and hang on. So if I do that, with XR, here I have a test sentence. These are something. See, the AR is not active. Up here at the top.
Yeah.
So that's all. I just wanted to show you that. I think the last few days I've been going up and down because I'm thinking about our own content so much, which has been really distracting from, my products are about reading a small academic article relatively, not about hundreds of pages of transcript. But and this, I really, Fabienne, I really want your opinion on this specifically, because when you start listing things, sorry, I'm taking over the screen again. Right, so let's do. Right, so I still have you guys, right? Yes. So when you start doing something like this, it's actually what some would call knowledge. Hi, Brandel. Good point. Fabian was starting to go through Friday, and I was at the same time going through how to look at our own record. And there are some issues that are related. So in this kind of a thing, yes, it's really cool to think. So this is a hypertext tool for thought. It is not great to communicate. And even having gone away for a few months and coming back, it's a bit messy. And I think that's okay. It's like working on pen and paper, right? You develop these relationships and things. But also these free-floating spaces, I think, are less useful maybe than many lists. And remember what Adam and Mark did with the hypertext conference. You click and you can see the citation flows. It's really rigid, but it means you know where you are. I think in places like this, it's really easy to lose context. So before you joined, Brandel, I was just showing a simplified find result. And if we can just keep that in the back of our minds while Fabian goes a bit through Friday, because we need to find a way to make our stuff more findable. Anyway, how was your day the next day, Brandel? Did you manage the meeting?
Yes. I was had some really wonderful conversations with folks in display technologies incubation, about what sort of opportunities lie ahead, and sort of planning the presentation that I'm making today on neuroscience. And so, yeah.
Oh, that's
good.
today.
And
Oh,
then,
excellent.
and then I got swept away to go camping for the weekend, so I didn't have nearly the time to work on it that I had expected. So, yeah, it was lovely. It was a good thing to do for Mother's Day, to do the camp that all of the mothers were on. But yeah.
Very good. All right. Yeah, Fabian, I think I was kind of interrupting you there. Please continue about Friday.
Oh no, yeah, I think it was a mess because everybody was trying to adjust both in terms of the pragmatic, like the schedule, the timetable, the time zones, what was feasible, what was feasible to show also, because sometimes, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I muted myself again.
Oh,
sorry.
okay.
Sorry, I couldn't make it. I'm sorry I couldn't make it with the temporal offset.
Yes, we need to find a way to make that work, either face-to-face, the easier, harder version, or maybe across 2 days. And this way we're sure to have at least some amount of overlap. But yeah, I think that the discomfort was good. I think everybody was pushed a bit in their boundary or beyond and their limits. So I think that was good. And I think the attempt of having the same text also was interesting. And I think also having the same text, even if some of us used, some didn't, that was not our text, I think is something maybe we should consider for next time, because the using our own material is exciting, but then we spent quite a bit of time thinking about the different like format and delivery and whatnot, which is important, but maybe it might be secondary to actually, let's say, producing and sharing a demo. So I would argue for next time, if there is, well, first I would be up for a next time, and if there is one, to having like this a text to do something with, whatever that is, but a text that is not ours, and can be a book, can be even like a book and an extract of that book or whatever, but maybe something that's not some of our own stuff.
Yeah, I second that. I think it was really interesting. Another aspect of it that was really neat that I hadn't thought about was the fact that when you have something that is not long enough to do the kind of thing you often do, you're forced to think about what approach you might take to create something sort of provocative or of interest along other lines and along other means. And some people are already practiced in that, other people are not. But it's a valuable way of being able to generate ideas, because some people sort of just think that they need to sort of work by coding or work by making a very polished thing, and that might still, even as they develop other skills, remain their favorite thing, and the sort of the contribution of choice that they make. Being able to conceptualize quickly and think about what the practical consequences of a certain approach is still really, really valuable for them and for the sort of general idea pool.
I don't know if this was an inspiration for the Moby Dick part, but of course, Moby Dick's been used for emoji, among other things, but this was a particular favorite from a while ago where an artist, Daly, took a section of text from Moby Dick and then created his visual representation of it. And he goes through the entire book that way. Yeah, it's really beautiful and inspiring that it was like almost like a daily mandala, but prompted from this external script. So bravo for doing that.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Randall, I can't wait to hear whatever you can reveal about your presentation that you're working on.
Yeah, well, so it's not about anything secret. It's all, you know. But what I said to people is that I think I posted the blurb in our sort of Twitter group chat, and it's just that a lot of people talk about user-centered design. A lot of people talk about user interface and things, but they don't think, or human-centered design. But they don't talk about what humans are and the way that sort of psychological and neurological research has impacted our understanding of what the self is or how a person thinks and things like that. So by jumping back to embodied mind, extended mind, predictive processing, and all of the different things that we know about how much of the brain, sort of the physical real estate, is devoted to certain things, or the way that there are feed forward networks sort of informing senses and things, that those are both fascinating, but also have direct and concrete implications for what kind of software we should develop, what kinds of patterns we should try to render clearly, and what kinds of things people will be better at being able to grasp onto. I built WebKit for the first time the other day, and it took 30 minutes of almost continuous terminal output. And it's not meaningful to me, but it would be barely meaningful for somebody who is normally doing that as their day-to-day job. You know, it's only through the repeated action of doing something like that that you get to see approximately how long each section of the linker and the clang, whatever, is, versus how long it happens to be, and whether the warnings are the usual warnings, and all that kind of stuff. And it would be really good, especially if your computer has done that a few times, to be able to kind of just see the deviations from the norm. And it would be really valuable for those to be rendered in ways that the human mind has the ability to actually notice and detect, quite distinct from just being this sort of almost endless seeming sort of pile of glyphs. So it's also about sort of software as external facing. Obviously, it would be really fun to upset the apple cart on people who are building something like Notes or Mail, but it's also like internally, the people who build our build scripts, the people who build our sort of, when you have a new device, like I've got, this is not a new device, this is an iPhone 13 Pro Max, but we have special, this is an internal one that we, you know, upload operating systems to be able to test and things. And that is software that Apple makes. And it would be nice for those people to know about these models of cognition as well. And so I think the goal is to get everybody I can muster to come through and actually see what you're making has choices and is premised on certain models of ways of thinking and seeing and being, and you have a choice in that. And please consider these as candidates for what to build your choices around.
That is so interesting, and it's similar to something that similar to me. Obviously, I'm biased. But something I was working on. This is what I was going to talk about on Friday, or demo related to it. But I wonder if it might be similar. If it's okay, I'd love to share something and walk through it for a moment. Hopefully, not to present or anything, obviously just a conversation, but I can give you a quick gist of what it is.
Alan, on that point, it's kind of important the way you preface this. Thank you. What Andrea said and what we discussed on Friday, number one was at the end of a 2-hour session, 10 minutes, everybody gives a summary. Very useful for transcript. Also, for the session we had before that, I determined that some of the longer talking bits were lightning talks. So I did more stuff for the summaries. So for you now to give a bit of a preface to say that you're going to present something is actually very useful. Because if you talk for a long bit, then that's easier in the transcript. It's easier for us to concentrate on that
I see.
and then talk about it afterwards. So I
Sure.
just want to say that was good. Thank you. All this stuff, hopefully I'll remember to delete.
Well, and then to add some context, this isn't so much exactly what I would present, but it's in context to what Brenda was just saying. So it's focusing on a part that is more around heuristics or value of abstraction, right? This is in conjunction with some pieces that I'm publishing in parts, but it's a cross-examination of Uncrossed, which is a mobile game. It's very rough around the edges, but it has an appeal in that it's such an abstraction. It's really just a case of, say, in the impossible level, it's 50 dots or nodes and some 130 lines leading to I don't know, 40 or so faces or triangles. But the joy of this for me, playing this over and over again in times of stress during COVID or whatever, is coming up with or observing how I would solve the problem, and then hacking that, seeing if there are better ways to solve the problem, changing my objective functions between like what is the ideal form, the ideal solution, to like how quickly can I solve this, right? So those are all shifting, and it's kind of that's possible because the game is so sparse. It's asking for you to put more of yourself into it. And what you said about WebKit, Brandon, and how that applies here is that kind of the argument I'm trying to use this to make is this actually helped me with machine learning quite a bit. I mean, I already knew some of the principles, right? But as I'm doing direct manipulation with my hand, and I'm essentially normalizing or min-maxing, I'm collapsing the data so that I don't get caught up in its original arrangement, and then I'm telescoping the data out, right? Which is, these are techniques in machine learning by different names, and I telescope it out to see the relationships between the bits, between the data rather. It's a wonderful, I think it would be a wonderful way to teach various skills, not just graph theory, but actually like, how do you find the pattern in the data? Or this could even be like your enterprise structure with all your departments. And not specifically, obviously, because reality is always different. And in reality, there may not be a solved state. So this is a toy, right? But the practice of it, I think it's interesting. I think it could be helpful. This is the kind of thing that I've wanted to bring up in the past with you folks. And what is the other part I'm missing? I just forgot a critical aspect of the idea. Oh, yeah, the other fun thing that is kind of positive in light of GPT is I asked GPT about Uncrossed, and because the game was around before 2021, I was able to ask it some questions as a graph theorist, and I learned a number of theories that I'd never heard of before. And so it was like a jumping years ahead from just reading like your primers on graph theory. I was able to say, like, what are the theories about unfolding, these planar graphs, and that actually led to some Python code, and it was pretty fun. Anyway, does any of this feel similar to what you were talking about, Brandon?
I mean, I love Uncrossed. I've played it under other names before, not on iPhone, but in Flash many years ago. It's a lot like UV unwrapping and getting a planar representation there, but a standard like Kurdish ReMU model won't submit to this kind of uncrossing because the degree of the graph needs to be very carefully considered to make it work.
Which one is that?
Oh, the games? No, I'm just saying Erdős Rényi is the name of that of a randomly connected graph, observing various sort of
I'd love to check that one
random
out.
connection things. Paul Erdős sort of invented graph theory stuff, social network analysis, and that's why people talk about the Erdős number.
Oh yeah,
the
right.
sort of degrees of remove and stuff like that.
Yep.
The sort of the bare abstraction of uncrossed is something that's slightly further at a remove from the kind of the metaphors that I was talking about in reference to what it is that people are, but still it really sort of because what I'm talking about is what human senses are and what human cognition and attention has the ability to attend to, and a little bit about why. But it's also very fruitful to kind of show abstract representations like that and say, like, what could this be? What jobs could we be doing like this? Because another thing with something like uncrossed is that just applying the force repulsion graph sort of effectively solves it, or discovers whether something is solvable relatively quickly and things like that. So there are sort of ways where that effective transposition allows you to recognize ways in which a problem can be solved more easily, and that's also some sort of one of the aspects of a lot of this discussion. I was watching my video on Timeline VR again the other day just to check whether it made sense to send to people, and one of the things that I sort of say there is that the substitution of a complex abstract problem with a more concrete, tangible one that can recruit our senses is something that is typically a really successful action for being able to simplify and broaden the scope of people's ability to kind of execute on it. And I think that being able to kind of start down that path by taking some abstract notion like an arbitrarily connected graph and being able to manipulate it like one does not and uncrossed is really fruitful. So
Yeah.
not directly in terms of like what it is that, because it's not, it's about sense and sensing fundamentally what I'm going to be saying, but yeah, like that problem transposition is really central to it. Is like we have a choice about how we represent these things.
Now that you reframed it, that reminds me what triggered it in the first place was less about the senses and I guess more about how quickly we hit our cognitive threshold friction points. So even something as simple as the first steps of making a model in machine learning, throwing the data, CSV, whatever it is, or compiling WebKit, I think there's still a toll that is put on us for those simple remedial, what you have to do before you can even get started kind of tasks. And I think it kind of wipes us out before we can do the creative work. And so part of the appeal of uncrossed is that it's like, obviously it's not real data, but I don't have to do any kind of pre-work. I can go straight into the solving of the problem, which this is the case with all games, right? This is the value of games. But it's interesting that with other stuff, work has come to mean all this pre-work. Like for Frode, it's how am I going to transcribe this stuff meaningfully, Anyway. Thank you for that commentary.
You see, you're right about exactly that issue, because it's very frustrating. Hang on. Oh, Emily, can you bring me some sugar for my drink? Okay, you gotta go. Okay, sorry, it's picking up. I forgot sugar in my coffee. It would be really nice to automate the record, because I would also like to really engage with you thinking like that. Because you highlighted another overhead. Another overhead is, that's really cool. I'm going to make sure that that's available, what you just said. Now, if you wrote a paper on it, that would be a lot easier, even if it's a small one. So we may have to reinvent what that means. Because everybody here is happy with the odd tweet or something equivalent. But, what format can we do that in? Let's bring back HyperCard. Anyway, Fabio.
Yeah, briefly on this, sometimes I ask my so I'm a little bit annoying because I try to be offline as much as possible. And sometimes you know, there are some people who say, oh, I don't use a phone. And then I just saw that in a documentary a couple of days ago. They ask for someone else when they get lost. Like they literally call someone and say, hey, I'm on that street. Can you use Google Maps too? And even though, let's say, the intention behind it might be positive, like, oh, I don't want to use Google. If you use somebody else to do it, I mean, arguable. Are you being a dick, basically, or not? But sometimes what happens is I ask my better half. I don't take my phone with me in the house. Then I ask her so that she can send a note, and then I receive it, and then I can do the search after. So I'm fighting hard now to find a solution for this, because the problem is I mostly have ideas when I'm not in front of the computer. I don't know, either working or being entertained or whatnot. So being away is valuable, but I should have a way still to record some of the ideas. Again, no matter how good they are, they might be shitty, but maybe if I work on them, they become good. And one of the way is especially, it's basically just dumping it, like you dump the ideas in some form, and without any interaction, for me at least. Because if there is something like, for example, completion, then you can drift away, or maybe auto-completion starts to do something crazy, and then you lose your train of thought. All that to say, I started to do a bit of speech to text and transcription on my desktop. I think I mentioned it on Twitter, where I have a little directory. And if I drop the files in that directory, it converts the audio file to text. So what I do on iOS is using forgot even the name of the app. Yes, the audio recording app. And then I send the audio file to Telegram, and then on Telegram, on my saved messages, I download it, put it in that folder, and I get back the text. But the goal, of course, is to have this all as one step, meaning I'm on my phone, ideally, maybe this one, but without internet, so just local Wi-Fi, or even another device that just has the microphone, and then it transcribe, and then I can, for example, use it directly as code, as a comment, in order to start to program or do whatever the step is. But I think, yeah, basically there is still a lot of different interesting and new ways to go from basically brain dumping, including like this, from video to text, or just from audio to text. And then to be able to compose, that's the whole point.
That's really fantastic. Yeah, you described a little bit about that first. I see Alan has to go, unfortunately, in a minute. But so this HyperCard thing, let's say we decided to make it just for the sake of 2-minute discussion, okay? And on the front, there's the content. On the back, there's visual meta or whatever metadata, something open. How can we right now use it? Because one of the great things about time is that it is relatively linear, right? So Alan maybe during his bit now could have written his own notes on a HyperCard. And as long as that is saved somehow or exported or stored with that creation date, you should be able to give it to me and then have it go into the transcript. Transcripts don't have very good time code, but if we provide these small things, and HyperCard was amazing partly because of its small size, in a transferable way, we will have solved problems, won't we?
Yeah, my sense is that HyperCard and almost the entirety of its use predated the internet, and so the things that HyperCard did are often not compared to the way that the web works in that way. Things were robustly represented. So what I think the sort of central aspects of it are that everything that was in HyperCard was representable and referenceable in a way that means that you could get to things and reliably kind of refer to them. They were all, as far as I recall, you tended to have a single stack And so all of the resources were sort of entirely internally contained within that stack. And so, but it was also at a time before there were particularly large or complicated file formats and types that you would need to be able to kind of refer to and sort of deal with pieces in.
Let's do it in PDF with Visual Meta. Let's just do it. It
Oh,
doesn't
I'm
have to
not-
have
I'm not
a
at a point.
4K video in it.
Yeah. So I'm not at a point where I'm sort of making preferences about the specific file format or anything like that. I'm just talking about the sort of the characteristics of the storage and the sort of the benefits and the requirements of sort of access through them. Yeah. So because sorry, go ahead.
Alan had to go. Okay, he's gone. Right. Yeah. Sorry, I thought you paused. Please go on, Bradlow.
So that's important. Scripting, so the ability to provide relationships sort of richly is also fairly important. One challenge with PDF is that sometimes people make their own readers, and so like the way, because you can write, as far as I'm aware, or at certain points in the past, it's been possible to write things like a 3D engine inside a PDF document. The sort of philosophical sort of relevance of a dynamic 3D engine inside a PDF is arguable because you know, if the central premise is what you print is what you get, then there's no possible way of doing that.
Yes, there
Go
is.
ahead.
Because initially, of course, that was the premise. Now you print to screen, you print to digital. You don't print to paper, but it's still printing. So I don't believe that there's any need for a PDF to have self-executing code. But there's no reason that it can't have externally executing code. Even today, you could write a program, putting in a PDF and compile it somewhere else, right? So if, and this is why the notion of an appendix for all of that stuff, if a reader can't deal with it, it just shows the pretty stuff in the front. You know, that's it. And, you know, after my horrible 3-word acronym meeting last week, it's not like I'm all, but, you know, Alan coming up with this and that. And anyway, many other things to talk about, but I just don't understand. Why can't we have a simple thing to just give each other information? It doesn't have to do everything. What would the alternative be for you guys? Because now we've said, just for a minute here, if you don't mind, another minute. So Alan did a presentation bit just there, and it was interesting and worthwhile. What kind of way would you want to have it by him framed? Let's not even say published or saved. What do you think might be cool or useful? It's got to be some thoughts on it.
To be honest, I think I personally at least don't fight too hard for this, in the sense that the statu quo, namely the video that you post on YouTube, is pretty good. We get a bunch of ideas on how to do better, but in practice, I think most of us don't invest too much energy on it because it's an okay compromise. Because yeah, at least it fills some of the, how do you say, limits. And I think the most important one, the most important affordance being like it exists, meaning that if we need to go back to it, if there was something specific we need to reference, we feel safer that yeah, there will be a trace of it. And I imagine that for most of us, I guess, or at least for most of us who don't invest more resources on the problem, that's good enough, basically.
Yeah, but
Well, I keep coming back to the literate programming methodology, and that's really what I'm doing on the tooling side, is trying to get to the point where I'll have a literate programming tool that meets my needs so that I can use that to produce a paperized version of the code that I'm working on so that I can explain it to you guys if you're not using the language and the tooling that I'm using to build the code that I'm experimenting with.
Yeah, but just something as simple as, well, okay. So Broad Brandl is doing tomorrow is doing a proper presentation, which will have great value because he pre-thought it. He didn't just speak it in a discussion, right? So that will also have a better transcript, I guess, than our normal chats.
Fingers crossed.
No, you know, yeah. I don't know.
So one thing that I haven't had much experience with, but I think would be really interesting to try and get the benefit from is, so, you know, Alan produced a video of his playing playing Uncrossed, and it was a really useful sort of active demonstration of it. It was neat that he was able to do that and talk over it, sort of distinct from what he would have had to be doing in order to have that action. If I were just to imagine a better activity of that, I'm inclined to think that seeing his body do it, or at least his fingers sort of have that action, and maybe his head pose or eyes, would be enriching to what he was meaning about.
Sorry, that is important. I'll be real quick. I promise.
Cool. I'll keep talking about it anyway. So I think you know, so he would have been playing that on a phone and doing this, and he would have been looking at things, and having a representation of that would be pretty cool. Being able to kind of see that big, you know, maybe even in virtual reality would be neat, because you'd be able to see sort of the entirety of the closed system over Alan plus the phone and his hands and attentions and stuff like that. It would also be really pretty cool to have the ability to play even a single level while some of that is happening. So you possibly, you know, either play it while he's talking or play it after he's talking, in order to be able to get the sense of what it is. If there are ways in which he could have used tools to call on ways to refer the sort of the nature and domain of the problem back to more concrete places, you know, the sort of the deep learning based sort of image synthesis systems could be helpful for him to be able to generate the ways in which that problem can look like other things would be pretty cool. So, yeah.
Sorry, I'm back in listening.
Awesome. Yeah, so I think the fact that he was kind of talking about himself as a person doing stuff, like being able to see him do those things, possibly be able to occupy the same space as that. So being able to see it in virtual reality with his hands and his phone, where you can see his head and hands in a way that is possible to kind of play back somebody using a Quest or something like that, would be pretty cool for understanding things. I think also playing a little bit. So if there are ways that in which he could sort of submit sort of interactive code such that we were able to play a little bit ourselves in order to think about what he's saying about it, that would all make for a good sort of demonstration, a good exploration of the relevance of what he was saying.
I kind of agree, but you know, within the future of text, there are some difficult notions here. One of the great things about text, of course, is it's insane the level of abstractions text can contain. And you know, nonlinear text on a space and clicking and all that is very powerful. But we've discussed many times. Overview is difficult. But I'm concerned about retreating back to what one might expect to see in nature. I think that for a lot of the AR, VR, XR stuff, there will be elements of that which we should be able to pull forth at will. But don't forget, the beginning of iPad and other tablets, there was a huge thing about that kind of multimedia. There was the kind of talking head of the author coming up as a cartoon, you know, Voyager with Bob Stein and so on. There was, do you remember the comic books on iPad? You would double tap and it would go from panel to panel on a big page. A lot of that stuff happened, but it didn't seem to take, it didn't seem to, for a mass market anyway, it didn't seem to really bring the experience of reading forward. Because also remember many years ago on Microsoft Windows, when you would click at the top of the screen, the menus would open with an animation. Do you remember that? Almost like really cool for a demo, but when you're working, for F's sake, let me have it instantly, right? So I think the act of going in and out of slow and fast will be very, very important. And this is why I come back to what I was talking about earlier, which is multidimensional is great, but having lists, like you showed, Fabian, in your workspace, lists, columns, you know what that column is. You know, it's really important. So sometimes these constraints are useful. But how can we augment our text experience? Okay, let me just push a little bit on this, just to see where we end up. Let's say we were all, you know, Brandl got fired, Fabian got fired, Peter got fired, I got fired. We all got fired, and somebody gave us $50 million, not a huge amount of money, but a good amount of money, and we have to release HyperCard. Right? Would we, you know, even theoretically, would we accept that? And so, if someone forced us to do it, what would we say the prerequisites for even doing it would be? One would be open. It would have to be open, but I'm sure you have something much more interesting to say.
I never used HyperCard, so I don't have much of a personal relationship with it other than seeing the way it impacted other people's sort of abilities. My first sort of run-in with hypertext was HTML, but at the very outset of it, because my dad worked on internet infrastructure in the early 90s, so 93, 94. I think referenceability is really important, being able to kind of get back to things. And so browsers can do it. The nature of browsers today and the nature of the internet today are at cross purposes to that, because everything is so ephemeral and link rot is real. It's a really hard problem to solve, because if you make things indelible, then people will come up with all kinds of ways of exploiting that. And it's very, very difficult to figure out the way around that. Web3 and blockchain are genuinely an attempt to try to render certain things indelible, but they're expensive and frequently create things that are illegal. So I don't know that they're necessarily solutions. I mean, the thing that's so important about the web right now that I would want, you know, a HyperCard of the future to also have is the ability to kind of, as Peter says, alter the user level. Anything that was built in HyperCard had the ability to kind of inspect and interrogate and pull apart. And the web, for better or worse, mostly has that ability today, albeit sort of constrained to people with a certain floor of capability, and various agents, Google, not the least amongst them, try to continue to raise that floor. So like, you need to know this and this and this and this in order to be able to sort of participate on the web in this way. And I kind of feel like that's pretty supremely hypocritical, because they live on the web, they scrape the web, they build these things because the web is inspectable, and yet, you know, with continued efforts to create things like Google Web Toolkit. They pollute and destroy the parsability of the web at every turn that they get the chance, simply because it gives them more dominion over it. It's not necessarily philosophically sort of devious, but it has the same result. And so I want to sort of call it out as being destructive, even as if it's not as intentional as it could be.
I also noticed a disturbing trend on a lot of websites now, where they're updating their terms of service to say that you won't scrape the web page or capture anything from the site by any automated means whatsoever, which just totally flies in the face of having web user agents and being able to make use of browser extensions.
Yeah, one of the things that
behind you, sorry, but it's closing the door behind you. So many startups and big companies do this. It's like, we do this, but nobody else can do it. It's like, how hypocritical can you be? But it's a typical business model, sadly.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the challenges right now is people scraping for the purposes of machine learning. And whenever you have user-generated content, when you don't sort of find ways to kick out the scraping bots, one, they frequently can bring all of your server infrastructure to its knees. If you have a poorly structured thing and you don't have rate limiting per IP or IP range and things like that, I've had many a web server just completely destroyed because it got tangled in one crawler bot or another, and that was entirely before this sort of the machine learning revolution of people being able to mine these things for interesting data. So I will say that it is definitely annoying, and the end user license agreement sort of aspect of it, sort of banning those things, is a disappointment. But I also think that there's an unsolved problem there in terms of being able to kind of provide roughly human-shaped interfaces that means that we can all agree on what kind of provisioning is adequate for what a web server even is. It's also the case
what particularly annoys me is where the terms would make it basically impossible for me to preserve an archival copy of the site so that I can get at it and reference it down the road if the web server goes away.
Yeah. And I'd be really interested in if Tim Bales, like Solid, is supposed to sort of fix that, or how it does, and where the costs get born and things like that. Because all of these concepts have their sort of their benefits and costs and failure states, but they also, like, being able to figure out where those costs are carried and what sort of magnitude they're going to end up is really important.
Do you have a link to that last reference you alluded to?
Oh, that's Solid. Tim Berners-Lee has been on it for a number of years now. It's what sort of caused him to kind of step back from the World Wide Web Consortium. He believes that it solves a lot, and I do not understand what it is. So if anybody has a better sense of it, then I would be all ears, not just because they're really big.
For the transcript, that was me with my hand up, shaking my head. No, I know several clever people who say the same thing as you. I mean, the idea is simple, I think. Distributed web, great. But, beyond that.
Yeah.
It's funny, though, because I've been lucky to have a few conversations with Tim Berners-Lee, and he's absolutely an incredible intellect, like just nothing I've ever come across. He's so way ahead of everything. But when it comes to this, it seems like either we must all be very, very, very stupid, or maybe he's gone so esoteric or something. I don't know, but yeah.
Yeah, my understanding, the best I can kind of put together for you, Peter, is that Solid is a way of having solid pods, which are persistent sort of bundles of data about things. And there are a number of brokering techniques for guaranteeing the integrity of the data that you have. How exactly that's distributed and how and where people carry the costs is something that's not entirely visible to me. I'm familiar with blockchain and the ledger systems that people have created there in order to be able to say, this thing is definitely that, and this thing changed hands in these ways. And people, claim that is valuable for currency. I think that's fundamentally wrong. Some people say that it's valuable for chain of custody. I think they're onto something a little bit more there, but the problem then is that you have to trust the agents for being able to make those alterations to the ledger and make those claims. You can just, the only thing that Web3 does is say, this claim was definitely made at this time. But it doesn't guarantee the authenticity of the agents. And so you need to have, you at some point always need to have some kind of external marker of authenticity in order to be able to trust that those entities are those things. And that's by turns, you know, one, already a solved problem in many places, and two, like if it's not solved by the system, then it needs to be solved somewhere else still. So it means that while this might be a reasonable way of brokering those things, like if you can trust those things, then you can probably trust any number of systems that can trustably come from those sources in the first place. So I'm not sure what it's solving. Solid and Tinviel's like enthusiasm for it predates somewhat the most recent sort of absolute explosion of blockchain, Web3, and cryptocurrency kind of related technologies, and so it may be premised on a different thing, but there aren't good reasons why it wouldn't fall prey to the same problems. Where, you know, the Bitcoin blockchain right now is many gigabytes. It takes many minutes for people to be able to kind of make an encoding on, because you need to have these large number of peers who are maintaining a full reference to that blockchain. And some of the things that people are required to encode on that blockchain are sex abuse materials now, because you don't get a choice about what you encode, and you don't get a choice about deleting it. And so the sort of the legality of even storing it is in some question or some doubt as well, because or like even just like Disney movies, if you store Disney movies against Disney's wishes, then you end up in some trouble. You know, it like Disney could be considered kind of a litigation firm with a cartoon generating business as a side hustle at some point. Like they really mean it. And so yeah, like how any technology like Solid or Web3 solves any of these things is kind of quite separate to exactly what they're for, but just as important as the sort of the brilliant engineering sketches that people put together in terms of the value proposition of why they matter in a place like the web.
Yeah, what he said. So not a huge enthusiasm for documents or HyperCard reimagining here, but Fabian and Brandel, let's say that, you know, we all got fired and got lots of money to make something new, and it had to be a way to interchange stuff. How would you want it to be? What would the basis of it be? Web or JSON or something else, or what's your feeling on that?
My feeling is that web is perfectly good. One of the things that's really important for web is that it be as plain as possible, and that it be, you know, to Peter's point, like scrapable. And that's partly for machine learning, but also partly just because user agents ought to be able to choose based on a number of dimensions of its ability to kind of portray things. So screen readers benefit when you have the ability to encode the intention and function of a picture. You can make machine learning based sort of readings of actions. And so if you have a woman laughing with salad, you have the ability to encode that. But if you have an entire web page devoted exclusively to women laughing along with salad, which it's a funny read if you ever stumble across it, it really exists. Then you want to have the ability to kind of take a multi-turn approach to getting the page to tell you things about the image, because otherwise it's just that there are 100 pictures of women laughing along with salad, and that's not as funny as being able to understand the sort of specific and individual characteristics of each. And so, like, having the ability to kind of yield up information in as flexibly encodable a way as possible, and being able to kind of reveal data sources and provenance. But this is all really basic web stuff. And because, yeah, like if you want to have a page that is the size of a single icon, it's really useful for people to be able to know what that icon should be and what information and meaning that can encode. If you have it on the size of a page, so that's really useful. But if you have it as the size of an entire stadium, an entire football stadium of Wikipedia, like, I would love a user agent to be able to answer that for me, and to be able to have a way of kind of taking over the entirety of a great big football stadium with just Wikipedia, either literal or metaphorical, so that we can think about what we can get out of that experience. And that requires sort of a surrender of opinion about presentation to some extent, where you have hinting about the way you think things should be, but that you sort of are able to accept and concede that that hinting is contingent on the appropriateness of the user agent. But if somebody is using 2 computers or 10 computers to browse that same experience, like what are the roles that those 10 computers play is something that it's really best left up to what the sort of the brokering user agent that's federating the commands out to all of those different machines. So
Is anyone working on going from images to prompts that would have generated the images? And that'd be a huge benefit to screen reader people if you could have the screen reader software look at the image that's being referenced in the HTML, go out and then come back and say, a collegiate Gothic building. In case someone hadn't already provided the alt text ahead of time.
I think so. I mean, not necessarily when created. A lot of people do that now because it's like a work of art. You would say what kind of paint was used. So I have seen that, but also you do have image to text for keywording and stuff. Yes, so I've seen that.
What I'm not sure of, and what I would be really excited by, is a multi-turn system. So with your background, Peter, if people were able to then continue to interrogate it and say, like, is it tall? And they would say, yes, is it tall? And like, is the camera pointed up or down? And to be able to
that would be
clarify,
invaluable.
right? And that's sort of at the crux of my objection to artificial intelligence right now, is that a lot of the time it's not possible to interrogate it. It's not possible to provide additional information, or to involve it in feedback loops. And as soon as people have the ability to integrate that sort of capacity and expectation for feedback into the way that they sort of render and conceive of AI, then almost all of my objections evaporate. But yeah, like, so to your point, Frode, like, I think things that can be represented, or AI systems or whatever you want that can kind of recover representation, those things are really interesting. So sometimes people do that with ML. They'll take screens that are otherwise opaque, in the sense that it's not that they're single flat colors, but that they haven't got any sort of machine readable data in them, and they reconstruct it. So there's a lot of work in machine vision to recover graphs and other things like that, and that's really valuable because it means that you can kind of integrate those graphs, or you can reformat them, or whatever else. I think conceding that whenever you portray something to a computer, then you are kind of losing the battle of controlling the context in which it's portrayed. The web has been really good for many, not all, but many people sort of giving up and going like, okay, you got me. Here's my data. Here's how I made it. So you can make your own, and I'd love that. I'd love that to happen more often. And it would be amazing to do that with functionality as well. We've talked a little bit about GNU and Linux, and the way that they're premised on having 100 little applications that do things. And so that if you had Photoshop as Linux, and I'm not sure if this is the way that GIMP is composed, but that there's a selection, there would be a selection app, and there would be a blur app, and they would run sort of semi-independently, so that you would be able to blur things outside of GIMP or whatever else. And so the natural extension of sort of ceding that ground of like presentation and opinions about it is actions and the control over the context in which those actions take place. So far, I'm not aware of people making a serious attempt at that, but that would be really wonderful because it means that you would be able to stitch just so much more together. It's at odds with the optimization of applications and their running, but it would be a really incredible step. Does that make sense?
I'm not hearing a lot about text.
So the thing about text is that it's a source of information, and the convolution of text in these ways is really important. So like having the ability to create graphs of text or interpretations of text, like being able to get the Gunning-Vog index of text on a given piece of text is really, really useful. But for me, like the crux of it is that text means something. It's not itself. It's not just itself. It's also reference. And being able to kind of pull meaning around and represent it in ways is complicated and difficult. So when I write a name, I'm more interested in the person than the name, and so being able to pull that around is important for the meaning of that text.
But doesn't that go for any media though?
Yes. Yeah. And that's text is a really important sort of component of all of those media in that it's currently the most machine readable. It's also possible to sort of, it has the most, because it's the most machine readable, it's the most transposable into other forms as well. So you can take it from speech and you can put it back into speech. You can
I mean, it's
kind
also
of link it in a way that, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
It's also quite human readable. Fabian?
I'll briefly share my screen to hope to show something I described last week, and I think hopefully touched a bit on the composability aspect. So here I made a little server using it's called TF-IDF, but it's basically taking all the documentation of the command line tools, for example, like this, ls or sed, or the kind of tools, the GNU Linux tool that Brendel mentioned before. So they have a bunch of documentation that looks a bit like this, which is nice, but it assumes you know what you're looking for. So what I did is I put all this documentation that I think is in here. Yeah, so I have 10,000 types of or documents, and I index them. And then if I in the browser here, I don't know if can one of you give me an example of what they would like to do with text with their system? A couple of words.
Link, relate.
I'll add text and maybe documents.
Sure.
Well, so it gives me a couple of things, some that are, in my opinion, probably not right, like actual link for files. But anyway, what it does is it tries to look up which of the documentation is most aligned based on this kind of document. And the idea for this is, I mentioned a couple of times before, to facilitate composability. So that, for example, I could do a speech to text of our current discussion, and then at the end of it, I would have components from my local system, this kind of local tools that are made with a pipe, the Linux pipe, or the Unix actually pipe, like so. Echo this, and then I can do the little pipe comment, then I can replace it, say this, become that. So most, but not all of them are designed to be like this. So the idea is to have, you have your problem, your challenge, your description, and then you have a bunch of suggestions, and then you combine those suggestions.
Okay, I dropped a couple links in the chat. The first one is to the Unix philosophy, which is a great book talking about that whole combinatorial approach to using lots of small dedicated tools. Then I dropped a link to a UPenn page on Boomerang and Harmony, which were systems using lenses. And the idea of a lens is a bidirectional textual transformation that preserves data so that if you edit one representation, the other representation is kept in sync with it in both directions. There have been a bunch of extensions to that that you can dig into. And I also tossed out a link to the concept of island grammars, which basically assume that you have a sea of text and grammars that are able to pick out recognizable and parsable subsets of the overall text document, ignoring the complexity of the overall document. And that was basically the approach that was driving Apple's data lenses when they had the data detection functionality back like System 7 era, would you say? Was that System 7? The data detectors?
It's still
That
here.
sounds right.
We still have them, yeah. But Peter, that's cool. But before, I mean, Fabian, you just went through describing. Any questions or specific comments you would like based on that?
I can say my personal hope then with this will be also to, let's say, generalize the habit so that I can find the right brick or module or components or whatever for composability at the right level faster. Ideally, like a background process doesn't have to listen to things all the time, but at least when I'm in some modes that are related to potentially creating something like what I mentioned before, either a conversation like this, or some of the notes I send myself after a shower or even during the shower, I guess, ideally. And then to go, to be able to basically do it more efficiently and faster, to recombine that faster. That's the hope. Or the process, let's say the process.
Yeah, I guess that is really close to what we're trying to solve. There is a thought from your head or something from the world. You want to put it somewhere so you can relate to it later. That's basically what we're doing, right?
Ideally relate, and again with the same kind of obsession I mentioned a bit before, that the result of that thing I try to relate with is something actionable. It's not just a description, let's say. It's something that can, for example, parse text or whatever other medium, doesn't really matter.
Yeah, we want to be able to put stuff in an environment whereby we can use it in the future, either as a memory aid or to make an argument or to educate someone else or to further learn relationships and arguments and so on, right? So it becomes like a 1950s information retrieval issue. Just kidding.
No. So I insist, and maybe I'm just being obsessive about it, but not just information, like an action based on information. Like ideally, the result would not be something passive. It would be something that could be, whenever called, directly used, like a piece of software, basically. Not just a description.
No. Okay, so I used the word. No. I don't think you're being. I think you're being very reasonable. It shouldn't have to be a passive thing. But information, that was not really the correct term. Yeah. Okay. It could be, like you're saying, actionable is. So we want to find a way to put stuff somewhere so we can find it again.
Or use it directly.
Yeah, and
we find it again, but so that the thing we do find is usable. And if we don't have to think to use it, but that the thing itself, then we send, for example, it either information or another program, whatnot, because it embodies the idea that it describes. I think that would be better and more efficient.
Right.
I think the other thing that is important about these is that you have these multimodal ways of creating artifacts, because like that, a search using that TF-IDF over the man pages is an act, and it has various meanings. It would be neat to be able to kind of recall and encode that as having intrinsic meaning as well as the results of it. Like we create text when we type on a keyboard, but we can also create text. So we create some sort of artifact that is sort of that we've built for the purposes of conveying and containing meaning. But we can also create meaningful artifacts through other actions and have the ability to sort of refer and relate those as well. So when I'm talking, I'm sort of creating oral text, but I'm also fidgeting with my hands. I would probably do more with them if there were something that was explicitly encoded and encodable within Zoom, and maybe future generations will be able to kind of reach back and pull that out of videos. I don't have the ability to change the color of the room based on what I'm saying, or ways of, like, all I have available like directly is the tonality of my voice and my hands and my eyes and stuff like that. But there are other ways in which you would be able to kind of, I could perform to be able to be understood, or ways in which you could interpret my performance. So, closed captioning is a way of enhancing sort of recall structure, things like that. And if we have the ability to kind of move across all of those different things. So if for example, I had a writing or textual performing thing where I could just say a word and it appears in a place, and then I could hold it up, then that would be useful for me, both in terms of anchoring what I'm saying, but also anchoring your attention on that particular thing. But my going into a text document and writing it and having my screen shared and things like that, like those degrees of interaction, slow down the utility and the value of those kinds of actions in a way that means that it happens sometimes, and people will be sort of on a call and participating on editing the same document at sometimes, but it's not. The barriers to that change significantly who does it and how much and what meaning they can get out of it. I feel like an interaction in an environment like this would benefit from a more free and easy sort of scaling of those techniques and strategies that can be kind of invoked by one person for their own purposes and then pulled in by others for their own. And I still think that's text. I hope that makes sense. Like, in terms of what Fabien and Peter are pointing to with the Unix philosophy, we have these sources, but they should be able to be kind of intermediated through a lot of these different sort of capabilities, and we can kind of manage the consequences the way we will.
Yeah. So I'm finding these days quite difficult for many reasons, personal within all of this, but also the advent of many types of machine learning and AI and so on is really massively on my mind, because it'll change a lot of stuff. And I don't really see our community or anyone else really taking charge of the intellectual augmentation using symbols. I would love to have a forum as well, to be part of a forum for VR. I'm very excited for the Apple headset, but I'm very, very worried that it'll be like a initial locked-in iPhone almost, which is why we did all the work we did last year. And I think we progressed very, very little. And it really is fine. It's an experiment that showed how difficult it is to think in that space. But when it comes to the more text stuff, I really do believe that having words on a page, being able to do things with them in a very connected manner, can be hugely powerful to augmenting how we think, how we see connections, how we communicate. And I absolutely agree with the military idea of what is it now, force multiplication or something. Same with text. An image with text can frequently make it better, but it can frequently obscure. Like the whole idea of the word cat captures all notions of cat, but a picture of a cat is that particular breed. We need to be able to change modalities. I'm not saying we shouldn't. I'm not saying, I come from an arts background. I went to Chelsea School of Art, and I do have hands and head and stuff. I want to use all of this. I agree with you. But I think it would be really good if we tried to also get to a ground of text, not a ground truth, because that notion is ridiculous, but some kind of way of letting this stuff go through text. And I'm not saying PDF, I'm not saying visual meta, I'm not saying documents. If somebody wants to fight with me over EPUB, that would probably be very useful. If someone wants to fight over HTML other than link rots, because almost anything can have a browser these days, that may be very useful too. The only things that I really do hate are manuscripts like Google Doc and Microsoft Word, because they are entirely owned, even though DocX is supposed to be open. I think all of those types of functionalities that they give the user are important, but it's nothing for us to invest in really. I feel, but it could be fought on that too.
Yeah, I think that the issue with DocX and those word processors, as you're kind of characterizing them, is that they are so opinionated about what they are there to do, and so they have a very, very specific sort of construction, and it has some really interesting benefits. Like, it does seem like the track changes are valuable, and it's a cool thing to be able to kind of add to a document. And people have conflict resistant data types or conflict resolving data types, CRDTs, whatever they're called, for the purposes of being able to kind of construct things that are Google Doc like, and I see those as being really interesting. One of the things I'm really tempted to do is to encode every single atomic action as being sort of necessarily related to a CRDT because of what benefit there can be for the kind of reconstruction of meaning, and the sort of endless sort of addition of meta information about context in order to be able to construct it as well. And CRDTs don't necessarily do a very good job of pulling in the entire world at the moment of textual or informational creation. But that's just because they don't realize that I have recruited them for that job. Yeah, I think text that can be manipulated is awesome, and I also don't particularly think it needs to be HTML. I just think that HTML is the place that has currently the least barriers to the sort of interoperability and the inspection of it. As Fabian pointed out, like man pages, the manual pages that are bundled in Unix are phenomenal for that purpose as well, but only as a read source. You can't then go and change like man mount or man rm, reading the manuals for how to mount a disk drive or to delete a file or a directory. And the sort of specific displays that you have within the Linux terminal are limited to the sort of the character representation. So you would need to pipe that stuff through an additional command in order to be able to come up with representation that could bold every instance of the specific terminal command within that terminal command, or put a picture next to them, or run Deep Dream on every paragraph in order to come up with an artistic interpretation of every paragraph on man, man RM or something like that. But and so the web is sort of the place that people have those abilities most ready to hand. But it definitely doesn't have to be that. It's just that given what we've done over the last 30 years with the technology, it's sort of the most amenable to being kind of abused into that shape.
I hope you realize now I'm going to just have to feed a couple man entries into Make Image and see what I can get them to come up with as visualizations of it. Yeah, I'm good.
Yeah, I think
Drawing is going to be running overtime today now.
Yeah, it's like when somebody took all of the terms and conditions for iTunes and turned it into a comic book of just Steve Jobs shouting at you. It's pretty awesome.
Oh, I love it. Oh, just by the way, in terms of software development background, I'm moving back to Electron after discovering that the inter-process communication inside of the other systems I was using was too unreliable. So even though Electron is huge, at least it's a lot more stable than the lighter weight alternative.
Sounds fair enough. Okay, so one of the big problems with HTML for me is that you need a web browser to read it. If you double click on a .html, it opens on your web browser, and I think that's really crazy. If there was maybe an HTML program that was designed for offline, that would be interesting. Should still be able to click on things, obviously, to access. But the fact that it has this half on, half off, disconnected, and what you're seeing on the page, you have no idea if it's on your hard drive or on the other side of the world. Have there been work on that, or are there thoughts on that?
Yeah, so some of the most popular ebook reader formats are actually secretly HTML inside. A lot of people will bundle various pieces of their documentation as HTML and then have it specially sort of carved out and nerfed. Oh, go on, Fabian.
No, go first, and I'll add if need be.
Yeah, you can correct me on anything I get wrong. So those are really common techniques where if you have a predefined set of things that you want to be able to kind of run, because the sort of text rendering, type layout, all of that stuff is best in class. Anytime anybody has called to do that sort of.
I'm familiar with this, but what happens if Peter writes an HTML document and emails it to Randall? How is it then open in that environment? It's pretty clunky, right?
Well, so if you open it in the browser, because the browser is for internet websites for the most part, then it'll sort of load up in the kind of low trust environment that is set up right now. You have it. You get a file : //URL, and it has a limited ability to be able to kind of read and things like that. But you can build an app that where you have the ability to set those permissions. That app can actually be really, really small because it has the ability to use the web renderer that comes bundled with your your OS. So on Mac that's Safari, on Windows that's now Chromium because because Edge uses Chromium. And so you can kind of make configurations and alterations where all you're doing is sort of setting the permissions. And so you could say, actually, this browser has absolutely free and open access to everything in this directory. And that would sort of solve your problems a little better. People haven't done too much of it. But it is possible to configure
any thoughts on this?
I think that it's to do with I think that's to do with the fact that most of the time people have a function that they want to kind of pursue with a system, and they want to be able to. So most of the time, when people are thinking about things like sharing documents, the benefits of it being part of the internet are too great, or they're happy to, or they think that it's so wide in terms of its remit that they can't kind of create an app that does the specific job in front of them. Yeah.
Okay, well, let me just ask you then, both of you, and maybe this is what you're going to touch on, Fabian, because this is actually driving me crazy. Not to say I wasn't crazy before, but if we had a blank slate, pretty much, let's say Microsoft, Facebook, Meta, Google, Apple came together and said, text needs to be redone. We've listened to the future text people. They're all geniuses. We've got to give them lots of money, create an entirely new thing. But of course, it has to have some kind of relation to the real world. What would it be based on? Because I hear a lot of dreaming, cloudy stuff, and I don't see any mountains or trees to connect it. Is that something you want to touch on, Fabian, or do you want to talk before we go into that?
Well, I'll talk and we'll see if it connects. I'm not sure. Some of the exploration I did for Demo Day on Friday was based on the week before, which was about working offline. The working offline part is for myself, let's say, need for both resilience and privacy. I still want to do crazy stuff with VR headset and monocles and whatnot, but I want better compromises basically, and that's why I give a couple of examples with Wikipedia, Stack Overflow, all this, and I show this again because one of the solution for it, and also a bit as Peter mentioned with Electron, you can package the entire browser as an app. I'm not a fan of it because I do think the browser is pretty powerful. But then one of the solutions, the guys who did the Wikipedia and Stack Overflow offline is, we mentioned it a couple of times, but it's like a progressive web app, meaning what it does is it makes a mini website in your browser and store it in your browser cache, let's say, or the local storage. And then what it does is it makes proxy, which is it goes in between your browser and the real web, let's say. So you have a new little thing in there, and you knock on the door, it's like, hey, I need the new file, give me the new file. And then it checks if you're online or not. And if you're not online, it's going to, if you stored it before, it's going to give you this. That's how most of being in between that state of offline and online work at the moment. It is not perfect, but in practice, it does work. Programmers, including myself, are still figuring out how to do this properly, but it's a pretty good mechanism. I don't know if it solves all the problem we'll have, but I think, for example, here, very practically speaking, I don't know if Randall knows this, I installed, there is something called Ish, where you have a kind of Linux on your iOS device. And then you can have a web server in it, because the goal is, again, to be able to do the pages, whatever there is on the page. So again, it can be just text, or it can be a website for VR, but hosted on the device so that you can do it offline. But a lighter way to do this is what I just mentioned, progressive web app, because you kind of fake the proxy server or the part of the web that you can cache directly in the browser storage. So all this to say that there are actually pretty good solutions that are pretty widely adopted. And one very good example for this would be the offline Wikipedia. And again, that thing, the progressive web app for Wikipedia, can load a 90 gigabyte file for instant access. So I think that proves, for the size and breadth of Wikipedia, that it's a pretty reliable solution today. We're still figuring out the kinks. Again, we, like all of us, but it is pretty good. And you have all the power of the browser with the power of your local computer, which can be like a huge thing with GPU, fast drive, all this. So yeah, technically speaking,
Yeah,
should be.
Just
totally.
for,
Yeah, I've forgotten. Sorry, go ahead.
no, please. Please. This is good.
In practice, almost all smart connected devices are a web server these days, and it can be kind of a liability because it means that every single light bulb that you have that happens to be internet connected is also a web server, as well as sort of a Wi-Fi server. It's not very good at it. It's not going to serve you very much, but every printer, every network attached storage, they're all serving that stuff via web pages and web technologies. And so, that sort of strategy of having some kind of backing store and some intermediation, and even like a lot of apps that you run on your computer are doing that these days as well, so that they'll open up a port, they'll act like it's a web thing, and they'll then piggyback off of whatever sort of browsing capabilities you have, be that sort of packaging and Electron, as Peter was talking about, or simply setting up, a WK WebView or a UI WebView and things like that. And that's an incredibly popular strategy for being able to kind of manage these things and brokering it. I feel like there are disadvantages, like to your point, Frode, about having folders that you have the ability to organize and kind of iterate over, where because they have decided to be opinionated about how those files are internally stored, it means that it has the ability to be opaque in a way that I find a little disappointing. But again, that's back to trying to claw back some more of that Linux and Unix ethos of saying, like, no, I want to stitch together this functionality in the way that I choose. So yeah, I'm not sure. But the challenges with browsers is that browsers operate in this place which is absolutely dangerous. The web is such a wild and unpredictable place that a lot of those protections of not being able to navigate local directories and things like that is because there's been sort of manifest abuse of people's computers and their identities and all kinds of things as a consequence of people being the bad actors being able to run roughshod over it. So, but if you have the ability to kind of trust an application to be doing some of that brokering, then some, if not all, of those trust issues go away, for better and worse.
Right. So, with me kind of for this argument, sitting on the fence on this, the problem I have with the web is partly addressed here, of course, about you don't need a web server necessarily. Fine. Of course, I agree with this. Then the other question is long-term archivability. I like the fact that PDFs show what they are. HTML doesn't. It needs to be rendered, which has its pros and cons. Now, another provocative thing might be, okay, for fun, let's pretend we're going to make the world's document HTML and treat them in this way, proxies and so on, special reader applications. Why not just call it solid? Let's, obviously trying to figure out more about what they do and pretending we're doing an interpretation of solid.
Yeah, that could be valid. It's something that I owe.
Can we get one of them as a guest speaker?
Tim Berners-Lee?
Well, anybody from the solid.
I mean, Tim, when I talk to him man to man, he's a wonderful human being, but absolutely impossible for me to get through his retinue of digital people. Sending an email to him, it comes back from secretary number 7, that kind of stuff. There was one guy Henry, whom I studied with my PhD. He was studying for his PhD, and it wasn't solid. And I don't understand a word he says. Lovely guy, but I don't understand a word. And the smartest people at Southampton too, outside of that, like Christopher Guttridge, absolutely no idea what it means. So I encourage you to look more on the onlines, but I don't think we'll be able to get any much useful net out of that, unfortunately.
I think that's the cost also if you do weird prototyping, or if you do whatever things in your corner and people don't get it, but you use it yourself. that's fine. The problem, I would say, or the challenge here is that the intrinsic value of, let's say, solid or federated data space or whatever, it has, because it is social, people need to understand it sufficiently. And I think that's a completely different challenge. Let's say if I do something completely weird on my desktop and nobody gets it, I can still play with it, and that's okay. But if I do something weird in my corner and I need some of you guys to connect to it and share some data and whatnot, and you don't get it, and all of you are going to say yes, but we're never going to do it. So it's not going to happen. So I think that's a little bit that place where they are probably right. I would hope so. I'm a bit optimistic, but they just are so far out in solutions against problem people are not really so attached to that. But yeah, I'm sure they're doing something that's well done in terms of privacy, in terms of security, in terms of scalability. But how it's being maybe it's showcased as something too smart for most people to even dare play with it, like their pods and whatnot. I would argue for this specific example that that's a little bit the challenge. You cannot do weird, exciting, complex prototypes or innovation or attempts for something social if you don't make it in a way that that's crystal clear, let's say, to the audience that must do some effort to join that kind of network.
Well, I mean, okay, because obviously this goes back to my experience with that acronym company this week. What are we supposed to do here? You know, on one level, yes, we should experiment wildly. It's really important to do that and have a record so other people can be inspired. But in terms of creating something new, you know, I have one approach, and at this point, I'm perfectly happy to leave that behind and go into something else. Just like when I started with you guys, I absolutely didn't want to talk about AI or VR. At a certain point, you just have to man up and get to the next stage. I'm ready to go to the next stage with documents and really fight for an entirely new approach, but it has to be, as you say, something sociably understandable. And in my meeting last week, they didn't have any understanding of what I would want to do this. Partly because I didn't sell it right. I thought I'd already seen the introduction video, which talks about, you know, pieces of documents that can explain what they are to other things. But still, you know, what is actually tractable? What is actually actionable? That can actually be done. Don't forget, you know, how was the internet made? It wasn't by corporations. It was a couple of PhD students, right? If we start doing our own document format or approach or flavor of something, but if we actually use it, wow, what could be better than that? Other communities may or may not like it, but
Maybe we should just mull this over and then regroup on Monday. And maybe everyone could come up with a little list of ideas and we could exchange that before the meeting.
that's not going to happen. And I'm not criticizing the community for that, but I think one of the nice things about our community is we dive in for 2 hours and then we go out. So we don't have this overhanging thing. Of course, anybody is completely able to do a tweet shared or email or whatever, of course. But yeah, I guess the question was slightly rhetorical as well. But yeah, we gotta get something together.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, so my bias is toward the web, but that's also my professional domain is web and web standards, and so what are the things that need to happen to the representation of certain functionality or goals in order to make sure that they're fit for various purposes. And so sort of the academic textual sort of referential abilities of the web as it sort of moves into the future is something that it's more than just a casual interest. I get to say where it goes. And so, you know, to that end, I do think that the web can serve these purposes. I'm interested in sort of the the very, very serious problem of link rot and what people can do as a way of sort of brokering alternative connections into data sources with local stores and other things like that, and possibly even just socializing that is a possibility and ways into that sort of domain of functionality is a very valuable thing for people to be able to pursue and consider. You know, like if you had a sort of a local browser that you had to explicitly elect to drag and drop things into, or have a folder in which you had sort of free reign, then you would have a runtime that you could have pretty hard guarantees about. And maybe that's something that the web needs to take seriously, is like being able to give people, one, the ability to author environments, not just pages, but meta pages, spaces in which those things happen. I don't mean meta or space in sort of VR spatial context, but just in terms of a domain in which a certain role to play. And then to make sure that everybody can trust that if it's constructed in this way, then you can trust it to have these characteristics and not to have these other characteristics.
Okay, we have to finish, and I think we kind of, just going to show you something. I think we kind of did a summing up there. Let me just, so my question is going to be something I've kind of asked before, but I'm asking a different way. Okay, so this is my thesis, here's visual meta. So then look at this, right? This is the glossary starts. Mm-hmm. So it's in the normal kind of appendix, large, but it is here too. Other than you guys having a virtual heart attack, what would stop you from putting HTML in a PDF as an appendix? You export to PDF, but the equivalent HTML is at the back. If the document can see that when you open it, it can render it in such a way.
I think HTML is way too verbose. I'd rather have a hunk of JSON representing the content that's in the HTML, so that a user agent could then render that in a visible form. You could maybe have a link to the original HTML, but HTML is just too verbose a format.
But there's nothing wrong with JSON. I don't mind having that in, because that is very compact, as you say. But specifically for Brandl and Fabienne, then, would that be... How would you feel if there was a... I'm saying you're shaking there, which is good, Brandl, in this case. So... But because the thing is, visual meta is supposed to be printed and all of that stuff. That's like the ideal. And then the issue is, oh, is the font too small on an OCR reading it in? But, you know, that's so rare that's going to happen. But you can probably have quite a good amount of HTML if certain rules are followed, because with the parser that Christopher Gutteridge wrote for Visual Meta, he found there were a lot of assumptions to be able to read a PDF properly about columns and so on. But those columns, those assumptions should be written in the Visual Meta introduction. You know, for a human or AI saying, okay, what is not clear here is so and so. So what's stopping us from building HTML into PDF then? Other than it's complete waste, of course, in many ways. All right, leave it there for a week. And any other summary points? My only summary point is let's do something rather than hypothesize as part of what we do. Hypothetical nonsense is super important as well.
Well, I want to get to the point where I have an Electron app that can work as a test bed, that can have code experiments running inside of it, so that we could just distribute copies of the test bed to everyone, and we wouldn't have to keep updating the app itself every time we want to try something new. So the experiment should be data inside of the shared testbed app.
Okay, that makes sense.
So anyhow, that's where my experimentation's going.
Very good. So my brother just got married this weekend. So we decided... Thank you. It's been together longer than Emily and me. It's 19 years. That's a long, weird story. But on the relevance to us, we didn't write anything down of speeches or anything. We didn't do any video recording. Well, I didn't, other than, you know, the confetti. I did do photographs because I feel for that type of event, still photographs communicates more in the way you want to remember it. You don't want to know too much, like how we stumbled on speeches and stuff. A few of these speeches, though, were very interesting. Actually, please don't go. I have to, this I must share with you. I should have it, accessible. Hang on. Oh, I thought it would be, hang on. I'm sorry that I didn't remember this earlier. Oh, here we go. Oh, damn. I'm going to read you the beginning of the wedding speech, okay? I made two. One of them, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, blah, blah, blah. Today we gather here in the beautiful city of London to celebrate a truly special occasion, the union of two remarkable individuals, Henning and Jose. On behalf of their families, I extend a warm welcome, so on. So then it talks about Spanish and Norwegian and everything. Of course, it's written by ChatGPT. And it was actually a really good speech. Towards the end, they got a bit formulaic and the timing was wrong. It says, you know, we're about to enjoy a cuisine. And I pretended to, oh, I'm sorry, I was supposed to read this before. It was only Emily who suspected that it was that. I made a normal speech too. I mean, just things like Henning Jose, today embark on a new chapter of your lives together, one filled with love, laughter, and endless possibilities. To continue this journey side by side, may you always be reminded of the love that surrounds you, both here and in the hearts of those unable to be with us today. Blah, 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 blah. Oh my God, I haven't seen this. This is crazy. It ends with, cheers to Henning and Jose, skål, salud, skål, Norwegian, salud, Spanish, right? And the only prompt I wrote was, write a wedding speech for my Norwegian brother Henning and his Spanish husband Jose, who got married in London today, referred to King's coronation, great food, nice weather, and family. And it did build a whole poetic thing about the coronation as well.
Impressive and scary.
Exactly.
Especially when they start turning it into generating legal briefs, they'll be able to fire half of my profession.
It's not scary, it's exciting. We just need to understand a bit better how it works, what are the actual limits. Like okay, for the anecdote, I forgot, I think I was on Hacker News and somebody was talking about, somebody answered a question asked about the quality of large language model for developers. And then some people are like, oh, super exciting. And a lot of people are like, yeah, it's just bullshit. It's just, it looks close enough to work. But the point is, it's there. Some of it, and some of it is bad, some of it is good. So our goal is here, I think, at least personally, it's filtering the fluff, filtering the bullshit, finding what's exciting, and doing the right way. So, but because again, it's like if you're disappointed or sad about somebody who is dead, it's terrible, and you must understand your grief. But yeah, the person is not coming back. So yeah, we need to find a way to make this work. But I don't think we should be scared. I don't think that's really useful.
I think we should be absolutely shit scared for several reasons. This is not going to be Socratic dialogues. These systems are going to mirror what we want, even more than social media, and assure us that Trump is not a politician, he's a good guy changing the system, etc. Whatever our belief might be. That was just one example. That was a tweet in the background. But this is, of course, you're absolutely right. This does not go back in the box. So the only, yes, see you later, Peter. We're about finished in about 10 seconds anyway. The only thing we can do is do the augmentation of intelligence on the side. And, you know, this is why I've been doing AI and Reader and Liquid. By the way, Apple now has disallowed my products because I provided a link to where you get the key. So they'd say it's an external subscription, which is illegal in the App Store, despite the fact that it's free. So I'm having some problems. But anyway, that's irrelevant. Yeah, look, we have a duty to take it seriously. But of course, we shouldn't just scream and say, you know, turn it on, we'll turn it off. So, yeah. All right. See you in a week, guys. Bye for now.
Take care.